Woohoo.
Hey, Denny, don't forget to record.
Very good. Thank you for reminding me.
Anytime.
So we may have a few others joining us. This is a thoroughly optional kind of session, but and our focus really is on particular questions, particular issues that that may have arisen in your particular journey groups, things you want to pursue further. Off the cuff questions are fine. We've had some questions that have been raised ahead of time, and I want to open things up at this point, that if there are particular questions that you would like to see dealt with during the session, to express that now, so we can kind of figure out where to put those, or otherwise to be able to just pick them up as we go along. There's no problem raising things at any point. But before we get started with that, I do want to give you a chance to introduce yourselves, particularly since I know that nobody has met Suzanne before, and this is my first time meeting her. Suzanne, why don't you share a bit about yourself and tell us about the journey group at St. Julian's that has started up.
Well, we've got a really nice group. Oh, I'm Susie from St. Julian's in Douglasville. Let me see, what can I say? Our group, we really got a great group. There's, there's 10 of us, which I guess I presume everyone has 10. I don't know. Anyways, it's been a really good discussion by everyone. Though sometimes I feel like we do our reading, but then it seems like our questions and this and that sort of get away from what we're reading, and so sometimes it's like, oh. And then I messed up this last week, and I listened to one extra video I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to. And here I am just going on and on, and everybody's going, "What are you talking about?" Anyways, but no, I've been going there for about 5 years, and I'm the vestry clerk, and I work in a lot of other things, the starting over group, and do most of the printing, do most of the administrative work. We don't have a paid administrator, so I do a lot of that. And we're kind of in between priests, and we're just hanging in here and doing what we can. And I don't know what else to say, except I'm really glad I get to be with y'all tonight.
Well, thank you. Good to have you. Rick Calloway, that some of you know, is serving as interim at St. Julian's right now, and so we made we invited some other congregations to join us, and Rick from St. Julian's accepted the invitation and has pulled together a good group there. Vicki, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Vicki Parton, and I'm a retired lay missioner with the Chattahoochee Valley Episcopal Ministry, and served on the diocesan staff for several years.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
John.
And I'm John Parton. I'm a retired lawyer. After 44 years of practice in Columbus, I do some mediation now, and that's about it.
Nice to meet you too.
Jane.
I'm Jane Wilson. I'm retired federal employee. I worked in human resource management at Fort Benning in my last job, although we came here from Germany, where both my husband and I had been working in the same field. We came here to Columbus in 1995, the end of 1995, And we immediately joined the United Methodist Church, and we've been there ever since until a month ago when we decided St. Thomas was more our speed. So we're members here now.
Right. Good to
We
meet
won't
you.
ask whether you sped up or slowed down. But,
I would say sped up, actually. That's what I was looking for.
I would say so. I'm Dave Wilson. I'm retired naval officer and retired federal civil service employee in the same business that Jane was, human resources management, and I am now retired.
Nice to meet you all.
Okay, let me.
Is the name, Suzanne, is the name of your church St. Julia or St. Julian?
St. Julian's.
Julian's.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
I'm sure you're enjoying Rick and Lynn.
I sure am, and I'm just gonna I wish that in a way we could just keep them because I don't want to lose them. I just love them.
He's a great
Great.
intern.
I love his sermons.
Well, as we get started, I was wondering, are there, you can see some issues I've listed on the screen here. We don't need to be held captive to these. We'll head in any direction, but the first item on the screen was asking for just a summary of what Manna and Mercy, the book we're using, what its view of creation is, and so we'll spend some time with that. Another question that had come up during the last session, there was talk about humans being distinguished from some other creatures by consciously enjoying God. And a question that had been asked in some of the groups was, do non-human creatures unconsciously enjoy God? And we had someone who was wanting to follow up on that. Then there was another question just talking about some of the sources that were used by, he was talking particularly about sources for Genesis and for the creation stories, but that was something that I wanted to deal with as well. The other items are some miscellaneous things, which we may cover as we deal with some other things, but are there any other questions that in particular any of you present online or on site want to be asking?
I'd like to address one of those that's in the list up there. And that's non-humans enjoying unconsciously
Okay.
God. We were owner of a dog, a wonderful dog, for about 12 years, 16 years.
Mhm.
And we live in the woods, and she just loves the outdoors, and the outdoors provided her so much, and God provided the outdoors. So I think that
Mhm.
she really thrived on that.
Uh-huh. Yes, well, you know, that's for those of us who have non-human companions, that's a very important element. So yes, we will pick up on that a little more fully as we get on. Suzanne, were there any particular things that you were wanting to have us deal with this evening that you can think of at this point, or?
Not at the moment.
Okay, good enough. Well, let's first just deal with some of the key emphases that are present here in Manna and Mercy, dealing with creation. One of the things that some participants in our journey groups have asked for is to make sure that at the end of each session or at the beginning of sessions, that we deal with some of the key things that we've been hoping that people would grab as key ideas in the process. And one of the things that is certainly a major issue in Manna and Mercy is the emphasis on the goodness of creation. We had looked at Genesis chapter 1, and there was a colored printout of that. And one of the things that kind of stands out in that list, it was good, it was good, it was very good. That keeps getting repeated through the whole process. That's a key part of the creation story within Genesis. And Manna and Mercy certainly hits that as well. In Hebrew, the word good is the word tov that you see on the screen. And the repetition, tov, tov, tov miod, very good, is a really crucial thing about that. And as we'll be seeing this coming week, Alan Story, the person on our videos, is going to be talking about the creation story as kind of the fixed point, the fulcrum that everything else in the Bible is kind of working off. And this notion of the goodness of creation is absolutely fundamental to the whole process. In Manna and Mercy, there's a constant emphasis on the issue of harmony and balance. And one of our exercises this last week was to be asking 4 questions. What does the passage say about God? What does it say about humans? What does it say about non-human creation? And what does it say about the relationship? And a key thing the book keeps emphasizing is the importance of harmony and balance between God and humans and the rest of creation. And it even goes so far as to talk about that in terms of friendship. The last paragraph on the first page. These partner creatures enjoyed God and helped the Creator take care of the beautiful garden called Earth. They lived in friendship with God, with each other, and with all creation. So that's a key aspect of that. And the underscoring of the word joy was especially important. And the book speaks of humans consciously enjoying God. And in what ways does the material talk about God enjoying humans and God enjoying the rest of creation? How does that occur?
Go on.
I guess from my upbringing, God became joyous and he was lonely, and he created humans on earth and creatures to bring friendship
Mm-hmm.
and joy.
Yes, I just the idea of a God by God's self doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And in many ways, that emphasis, good, very good. It's kind of like in a performance, bravo, expressing appreciation for the rest of creation. That strikes me as a very important aspect in terms of God enjoying creatures.
But I'm not sure we can take that literally, because scientifically we know the earth is billions of years old.
But why is that? Why would that be a problem? to have God enjoy a billions of year old earth.
Without anything on it.
You mean with no people, is it? He
Uh-huh.
might have put all the other things there first.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
he created the environment that we are in. And I think it's important that we enjoy that environment because we are the stewards of the
Yes.
environment that surrounds us. This is God created this and we want to enjoy it and we want to improve upon it. And it's a big part of it.
But do we really?
What do we
We're not
enjoy?
taking care of the climate, the
Mhm.
resources that God has given.
One of the key things in the series is that our first couple sessions have really dealt with one page, just one page in Manna and Mercy, dealing with creation. This next week's session, not this week, we're taking a week off because of Ash Wednesday and that following week. But when we resume with session 3, we're going to be dealing particularly with the issue of sin, the misuse, and basically the undermining of the goodness of the created world, the way in which we don't live in harmony and balance in this variety of ways, in which there isn't joy, there isn't enjoyment that gets expressed, but creation itself, to look at that as being for the purpose of enjoyment, the purpose of relationship, and the enjoyment of relationship, that becomes a really key part of that.
Some of it's hard to keep in balance because you think, people periodically try to go back to nature and live in a very simple way, but it doesn't seem to ever take broad hold or even last very long. We used to have communes and things like that because, we always want to improve things around us. And then as we do that, then we sometimes that expands outward and outward and outward. And then people look at how can I monetize this? And that's how we get to where we are, the greedy capitalism thing. I mean, I'm not opposed to capitalism. I like to have nice things and as much as anybody, but I don't know how unless you put, I don't want to go to a system where we put caps on what people can enjoy, but there needs to be a way to have balance. And that seems to be always elude us because, we have billionaires in this country, we have oligarchs in Russia and other countries that are supposed to be more, even across the board, but they're not. There's always people who are fascinated by power and money and greed.
And God created us to have free will. That's the big issue. That's why people sin and all these other things occur because of the free will. If he didn't give us a free will, it would just, his job would be a piece of cake.
Except there would be no companionship, there would be no friendship, there would be no real harmony. There's simply mechanism at that point. Sit around with your robot and press the button to nod its head, smile, and that's not real relationship. And that emphasis upon freedom in terms of the next session, that's going to be highlighted very, very strongly with that there is no creation without freedom. And part of the things emphasized in Manna and Mercy, talking about creation as a process, indicates that creation is something in which there is constant sharing of power. It isn't God being puppeteer and pulling the strings and making everything happen. In Genesis 1, there are materials that said the earth, well, you have God's command, let the earth bring forth. And the earth brought forth, etc. It's not God speaks and poof, it's there. But God working through other kinds of things. God said, let there be vegetation. Oh, the earth produced vegetation. There are those shared kinds of responsibilities that are present in the creation process. If we look at the history of our universe as described by science, in which for most of the universe's history, things have been relatively simple. Okay, we could talk about largely inert matter for most of the history of the universe. But as things became more complex, okay, which all built on the previous simpler things, the more complexity there was, you then generate more freedom in the process as well. When you have no life, and then, oh, life is able to develop. Oh, when there's life, there are things that are made possible that were not possible prior to life. In the textbook in Men and Mercy, there's an illustration of a cell that is starting to go through the process of cell division, and all of a sudden we have this pop and the exclamation, wow. Oh, it's not just God saying, let there be two cells. We have the cell carrying out various kinds of processes that are part of the continuing partnership, if you will, between God and the created world.
Does that mean that was not possible after Eve ate the golden apple?
It's rather interesting that in Genesis chapter 1, there was no Eve at all, and no apple, and
No sin.
what?
No sin.
Right? With the creation story that is told in starting in chapter 1, there is the assumption of all sorts of joint ventures with the creation of humans. Let humans have dominion, which can be turned into a terrible thing, but that's not the intention. Short, to have dominion, okay, to be God's representative in the world, to be in the image of God. Doesn't mean, oh, you look like God. To be in the image of God was a standard way in the Mesopotamian world in the world of ancient Babylon, to talk about the governor of a particular province who represented the king. That governor was described as the image of the king. He was the king's representative. That image of the king did not have authority to do whatever he wanted. No, he had to conduct his rule in accordance with the king's policies. To say that humans, male and female, are both made in the image of God, as Genesis 1 says, is to speak of humans being in a situation of representing God and being God's representative on behalf of God, on behalf of God's rule within the created realm. And that's all part of this friendship, this partnership that that we have Manna and Mercy talking about with that. Does that make sense in terms of talking about image of God in that kind of way?
Yes.
It is really a continuation of this relationship kind of
Oh,
thing.
God also wanted us to reproduce
Right.
and nurture other people.
Right.
And this is the growing of these two cells
Mhm.
is all basis to nurture that and reproduce and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, in Genesis 1, the word blessing is used specifically in relationship to reproduction, and that's viewed as a partnership. That's something that humans do. That's something that plants do. That's something that humans do, and that's all part of that general partnership that is very good. With non-human creatures enjoying God. As a pet owner, Dave, you seem to find that having some real benefit.
Yeah, I think so. That was very important to us to have the pet enjoy their environment, enjoy us.
Mhm. Others want to add about that aspect. Striking in hymns, the hymn "All Creatures of Our God and King," and talking about inviting all the creatures to praise God. That one can look at that as poetic language, and yet, yeah, my dog enjoys God the way a dog enjoys God. An earthworm enjoys God the way an earthworm
All
enjoys.
animals, big and small.
Yes. With this, to recognize that creation has various levels of complexity, and I think it makes perfectly good sense to think about God's relationship with each creature as being something that is significant to God. To be dealing with a chunk of quartz, I think that's important for God. If we don't say that God enjoys the chunk of quartz or granite, or a stream, we're really kind of cutting off the important aspect of creation as really a crucial foundational principle in terms of life of faith. That needs to be present all the way through. The illustrations on the front and back of the book. Notice the companionship, friendship, peacefulness, cooperation. Those are really key aspects of Van Erlander's artistic description of creation. Is something that has that relational quality to it.
I hadn't thought about the fact that he raised the creation is created vegans,
Mm-hmm.
and it only after the flood does it change. You wonder what caused that change.
Yes,
But it had to disrupt the relationship between animals and men.
mhm. Yes, this is a strange little element in Genesis chapter 1 that it specifically deals with vegetation as being food for animals.
Right.
Okay, and for humans as well. Okay, there is no description, but in the flood story, you have a description of violence having entered into human life, and it ties violence in human life to violence in the rest of the world, and both those things are addressed within the flood story, and marking that as it's a symbolic story dealing with a change that acknowledges that, hey, the kind of intended partnership and harmony, that's not something that we see continuing, and this becomes a way of underscoring that.
That's why we had the animals come 2 by 2. That was for them to reproduce.
Mhm.
You had to be, you just couldn't have one, you had to have 2 animals of the same type.
Mhm.
Did the Jews begin as vegetarians? I've never heard that before.
Not necessarily. And please recognize that the stories here in Genesis 1 through 11 really has nothing to do with Judaism as such. It's dealing with the background for humanity, and is giving a description of humanity as a whole. But in the material, in the Cain and Abel story, for example, it's in Genesis 1 through 12 or 1 through 11. You have Abel being a person who, well, the difference between Abel and Cain was between a shepherd, okay, one dealing with animals, the other being dealing with farming, yes, agriculture. And you have a sense of some of the opposition in those stories, even at that kind of point. But in the history of Judaism, there has not been a situation that talked about pure vegetarianism. However, as we move along in the story, we're going to encounter various dietary laws that were there. And today, many Jews find it far easier living in a diverse society to function with vegetarian meals on planes and so on, rather than trying to adhere to the kosher regulations when you don't have control over what's happening to the food. So that's a very, very frequent concern today. Let's pick up just a couple more things about the key emphases. Okay, the goodness of the created world, joy, enjoyment, creation about sharing power, sharing responsibility, being partners. And I think it's worthwhile thinking about God's creative power being that of love. Now, one of the things we're going to look at in the next session is the role of violence, the role of force, and what happens when we insist on coercing others to have our particular way. And you know, when I'm in the supermarket and I see a mother or father give one's kid a whack. No, when that happens, I don't think, why? What a powerful parent.
Like
no,
abusive.
Nasty parent.
Yeah, I mean,
Abusive.
if the only way we can function is to coerce somebody to do something that we want and cannot persuade, cannot encourage, then there's something rather problematic with how we're thinking about our exercise of power. And for the coming session, I hope you'll think about that aspect being there. In Manna and Mercy, when it talks about God's creation, it's talking primarily in terms of God's intentions and God's purpose. What God is always doing. God is always working to bring about harmony and balance. Always. God, I would say God is always doing everything that God can to bring about those things. And yes, a lot of bringing about that kind of cooperation needs to occur through God's partners in creation, humans, working with one another. John's work in mediation, trying to find some way of dealing with differences, being able to find a way of working things out. That's really a crucial aspect of that. So to talk about God being creator and God's creating is talking about something that God is always doing, not something that happened once upon a time, a long time. If we think of creation as something that happened at one point, we frankly undercut a crucial aspect of the entire Bible. God continues to create. God continues to create. When Manna and Mercy tells the story of creation, there is not a single thing that it says in its description of creation that a scientist could not also say. There is nothing talking about, oh, it happened just 6,000 years ago, something. No, that's not what Manna and Mercy. No, it says God created. Okay, for God to create is for God to have a purpose, God to have intentions, and basically a claim on the entire universe, on all that is, so that everything gets looked at in terms of value and meaning and purpose.
Well, it's a living document, the Bible. It's not a bibliography of things that happened in the past. It continues to be a living document.
Yes, absolutely. And to recognize that with creation, okay, the doctrine of creation within Christianity has never been primarily about how we get stuff. That's the production of stuff is not the story of creation. The production of a world where it is possible to bring about God's purposes. Okay, to focus on value and meaning and purpose, to deal with cooperation, to deal with goodness, to deal with harmony, to deal with balance, to deal with joy, to deal with the thriving of things in relationship to one another. That's what creation is about. Not, oh, there's nothing, then there's something. That's an interesting problem, but that's not what the Bible is interested in. And therefore, that's not what this particular series is interested in. Creation is far more than that. Anything else in
So
terms
we've
of?
got a symbolic story that sets the framework for that concept. God's always working in creation. Because that's not what he said, or the chapter 1 says.
With, well, that is what chapter 1 in Man and Mercy says. And in
That hadn't risen to the scripture level yet.
this is true. But last week, one of the things that was shared, and I don't know whether your particular groups dealt with it or not, in relationship to the setting in which Genesis 1 was first written in Babylonian society, and basically here in the middle between year 500 and 600 BCE, during the Babylonian exile, is when this particular story was written. And in materials that were distributed, connected with this last week, there was a psalm, Psalm 137, that talked about hanging up their harps on the willow trees, the kind of despair that people were experiencing during the Babylonian exile. On the other column on that material, there were materials written at that very same time from the book of Isaiah, in which language about God as creator was teamed up with language about God as redeemer. And for God to create the universe and to create Israel are linked together fully. For God to deliver the Hebrew people from exile in Babylon is described as an act of creation. The same verb in Hebrew, barach, a verb that is only used of God within the Bible, to create the universe, to create the people, is viewed as being part of the same kind of process. They're all part of the same thing. God's intention expressed in creation gets expressed in every situation where God frees people, where God strengthens them, where God delivers them, where God brings about reconciliation. All of those things are key creative kinds of things. And what Man and Mercy is doing in its creative retelling of the story of the Bible is to pick up that emphasis that we see particularly there in the Isaiah materials, which talks about God as creator. In that situation, hey, Israel wasn't created at the same time that bunny rabbits were. But no, it's an ongoing kind of process. And to see God within that 13.7 billion year process, God always being involved, as opposed to, oh, you don't have it, now you do. I think that becomes a way for us to be able to understand in a meaningful way what it means for us to confess, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven.
One of the problems, I think, is in that we've learned in the first chapter that people look at God in different ways. They can always quote something in the Bible that meets, well, God was brutal in this area, well, so he's brutal God, that kind of thing. And then you think of person whacking a kid in the supermarket. The other thing was spare the rod, spoil the kid. And I don't think that's in the Bible. I think Benjamin Franklin came up with that. All this type of thing is attributed to the Bible. That's why they can beat their kid in the supermarket.
Well, as and this will be emphasized in one of the videos for this next session as well. There are a lot of horrendous things that are said in the Bible. Absolutely horrendous. And to say the Bible says it doesn't make it good. And this is why in the very first session, to talk about we as Christians reading the Bible through the lens of Jesus. Would Jesus be able to say amen to a particular interpretation that we come up with? And to preview this video again, Alan Story is going to speak of the creation story that is in the Bible, or the creation stories in the Bible, and the Babylonian creation story. He's going to say, hey, the Babylonian creation story, something called the Enuma Elish, is in violence, by violence, for violence. And the biblical creation story, in love, by love, for love. Now, you aren't going to find the word love mentioned in Genesis chapter 1 at all. However, as you look at that description of how people are to relate, how God applauds and says, "Tov meod," to what is present in the created world, that's for the purpose of love. Partnership is love. Partnership, getting along with others, dealing with the flourishing of people. That's the direction of love, and not just dealing with getting one's own particular way. I find the material that we'll be dealing with in the third session and talking about sin being so relevant in terms of the invasion of Ukraine and some of the key issues that are surrounding that. Yes, you can find all sorts of violent things in the Bible. And next session, we're going to see numerous attempts to have God be remade in our image. Not us made in God's image, but God remade in our image to reflect our selfish, violent tendencies, our self-centered tendencies. And when that occurs, no, that's not part of the Christian understanding of who God is. Yes, it's in the Bible. No, that's not what.
Written by human beings who have their own slant.
Yes. Mm-hmm. We've got about 10 minutes left in our agreed upon time. Are there particular things that you want to follow up on, or what? It's up to you.
I think we've been in the session we've gotten done a lot, considering we just only had really the first chapter to go
Page.
through.
We've only looked at one page.
And one page, how how long do you beat a dead horse? You know, we were going over lots of things there, and I think it's sinking in.
Mhm.
I think our group's still behind on that.
Okay,
Maybe we'll catch up next week.
All
Next
right.
session.
hey, that's fine. And to recognize that each group has its own personality. There's no identical process that occurs in groups. They all have the same materials, but the directions they go, that's part of the freedom of the process and part of the way in which learning occurs. But
Group dynamics are an amazing thing, all right.
that's right.
So what is the reading for the third session?
For the third session, in terms of the manna and mercy thing, you're going to finish chapter 1. Okay. Now there are some other things that will be sent out in a few days, but there was something sent out yesterday.
Doesn't 2 and 3, we do each chapter in 1 week?
Once we move into session 4, yeah, it's usually going to be a chapter a week. I think there's maybe one spot where we take a couple weeks for a chapter, but we've taken our time at the beginning of this process, particularly to look at some of the biblical interpretive processes that we're going to be using as we continue on through the rest of the series.
I think we learn something each time we read that first page.
Mhm.
There's a lot in there.
One of the things that I find, I teach religious studies at the college level, and when I ask students to read something, they will read things, and what they see is what they expect to see, which often is very different from what is actually there. And one of the important things I think for us to learn in reading the Bible is to learn to slow down and to keep asking questions. Okay, is there another way of understanding this? Okay, those of us who've been involved in church life for most of our lives, there are particular ways that we look at things, and I know that, and we just automatically go with what we've always thought. But I know that as I was dealing with manna and mercy, I read very quickly what it said about creation, and it did not jump out at me that, the author is talking about partnership, about God sharing power with creation. I didn't notice that at all going through. And yet that was the whole point that the author was trying to make. I assumed that, this is talking about the beginning stuff. Period. It's talking about, if you will, God's vision, God's intention. And that vision, that intention continues on to the present, it continues on into the future. We're part of that story.
Well, reading the book and you see all the pictures in there, it's look like you're reading a comic book.
Yep.
And so you don't necessarily take it as seriously as it should be taken.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Well, I think we'll just kind of wrap things up at this time. Or well, let me show you just one thing here. And the last page of the introduction in Man and Mercy introduces the name Yahweh. basically viewed as God's first name within Judaism. A word, a name that is so holy that Jews generally do not pronounce that word. In most English Old Testaments, wherever you see the word Lord written in all cap letters, the word Yahweh is what's being talked about at that point. And thus, let's see. This is the second creation story on chapter 2. In the day that the Lord God created, made the heaven and the earth, etc. Lord God, Lord God, Lord God, Lord God, Lord God, Lord God, Lord God.
I wonder why that is.
Well, asking that question is an important thing. And it's one of the reasons that most scholars say, oh, we have two creation stories that are occurring here. The name Yahweh is creator. It's not mentioned at all in Genesis 1. Not mentioned at all. And the term Lord, term Yahweh, which is a name, not a title. Our use of having the word Lord substitute for Yahweh came from a Jewish practice that in the Hebrew Bible, since you weren't supposed to speak the name Yahweh, they did was take, Hebrew is written with primarily consonants. And you take the consonants for Yahweh. And then they put with that vowel markings, which occur above and below the line, the vowels for a different word, Elohim, the word God. When you have those vowels with those consonants, it creates something that is absolutely impossible. It's impossible to speak that. You cannot. In Hebrew classes that I've taken, we would be taking turns as students, going around the room, reading a particular passage of the Hebrew Bible, and a student would come to a spot and you'd see him try shaping his or her mouth around something. And the instructor said, it's the divine name. Oh yeah, Adonai. Would say the name for, well, Adonai, Lord, is the word that was substituted. And that importance of the word has really been central in the Ten Commandments, when it says, you shall not take the name of Yahweh, your God, in vain. Okay, that's what it's talking about. You don't toss around Yahweh casually. There's a rabbi whom I respect immensely. His name is Arthur Waskow. And he expressed for me, one of the most helpful ways of talking about Yahweh and the significance of that. In Genesis chapter 2, when it talks about the creation of the human, it talks about taking the dust of the earth and breathing into it the breath of life. And the human became a living being. Arthur Waskow talks about his way of thinking about Yahweh, and said, Yahweh is the one who provides the breath of life. He said, think of it this way. Yahweh. For those who dealt with Yahweh, Yahweh was someone you breathed in and breathed out. That's the breath of life. It's that constant relationship with God. You cannot function apart from God. You cannot function apart from that breath of life. And that's been a powerful image for me to think of. If you try that, you cannot use your vocal cords to say that. You can only do it breathing. And Suzanne, I'm not sure whether that came through. The microphone is a long ways away from me in terms of the breathing, but to breathe in Yah and then breathe out way. That God is that close. God is that involved in what life is. And I think that's just a marvelous image to be dealing. Thank you so much for being here. Suzanne, great to have you with us this evening. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks. We won't be having one of these sessions next week because there are no journey group sessions for the coming 7 days. But we'll be back in 2 weeks for this. So
Okay.
have a good evening.
Why is the first chapter of Genesis story called the Priesthood Story?
The Genesis 1:1 through 2:4a is the priesthood story because it was a group of priests during the Babylonian exile who wrote that material. And that story, that priestly story, is part of a whole series of stories that have particular priestly interests. And you'll see the same interests, the same vocabulary occurring all the way through this priestly strand of material. Likewise, the creation story in chapter 2 of Genesis is called the Yahweh story because it uses the name Yahweh as the description of the creator. It talks about creation being in a totally different sequence. It talks about the method of creation being totally different. And during the Babylonian exile, the priestly authors took their own materials, combined it with the material from the Yahwehs. Here's a diagram that basically dealing with that. You'll see the priestly, the P down there toward the bottom of the screen, the J up toward the top of the screen. The J material was the earliest of the creation stories that was there. And the J story is, again, a continuous narrative that goes through the first 4 books of the Hebrew Bible. But these four sources of Torah, J, E, D, and P, that idea has been around for 150 years and has been largely accepted within scholarly circles for talking about the background of these materials. Each of these stories have their own particular emphasis, their own slant for looking at telling the story of God's relationship with Israel. For our purpose in our journey groups, we aren't spending a lot of time dealing with that, but next time, if you're interested, we can explore that a little bit. I do have Gerald's, and I will be sharing with the group a comparison of the two creation stories, if you're interested in looking at those things. Sequence of creation, totally different. But that's for another time, in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
you.
Good night.
Bye.